The Pomerium was the sacred boundary of ancient Rome, separating the city's religious and political center from the territory beyond it. It was not simply a defensive wall or a physical border. Instead, the Pomerium represented a legally and religiously defined space within which special rules applied. For the Romans, crossing this invisible boundary could mean entering a different sphere of authority, ritual, and political life. Roman tradition connected the creation of the Pomerium with Romulus, the legendary founder of Rome. According to ancient accounts, Romulus marked out the boundary while establishing his new city on the Palatine Hill. The ritual was traditionally performed using a plow drawn by animals, creating a sacred furrow around the settlement. This act symbolically separated the newly founded city from the surrounding world and placed it under divine protection. The concept was deeply connected with the Etruscan religious tradition of founding cities. The boundary created through this ritual was considered sacred, and certain activities appropriate outside the city were restricted within it. The Pomerium therefore represented more than geography. It helped define Rome itself as a religious community. One of its most important functions involved military authority. Roman magistrates and commanders could possess imperium, the legal power to command armies and exercise significant authority. However, military power was treated differently inside the Pomerium. Traditionally, armed forces were not supposed to operate within Rome as though the city were a battlefield or military camp. This distinction reinforced the idea that political government inside Rome should remain separate from the command of armies outside it. This rule also affected victorious generals. A commander returning from war normally could not simply enter the sacred city while retaining the full military character of his command. If he hoped to celebrate a triumph, he had to remain outside the Pomerium while awaiting the Senate's decision. The triumph itself became an extraordinary ritual in which a victorious commander entered Rome in magnificent procession with his soldiers, captives, trophies, and spoils. The Pomerium also influenced religious life. Certain temples and cults were deliberately established outside the sacred boundary, particularly when their religious character was considered connected with warfare or foreign traditions. The location of temples therefore reflected not only available space, but also Roman ideas about the relationship between religion and the sacred organization of the city. Death was another important distinction. Burial inside the Pomerium was generally prohibited, helping explain why Roman tombs and funerary monuments were commonly constructed outside the city along major roads. Travelers approaching Rome would pass long lines of tombs before reaching the urban center. The famous Via Appia preserves some of the clearest examples of this ancient funerary landscape. The Pomerium should not be confused with Rome's defensive walls. A city wall existed for military protection, while the Pomerium existed primarily as a sacred and legal boundary. The two could sometimes run near one another, but they did not necessarily define exactly the same territory. As Rome expanded, large populated districts could exist outside the official Pomerium, while still functioning as parts of the wider city. Over the centuries, the boundary itself was expanded. Roman tradition credited the king Servius Tullius with enlarging it as Rome grew, although the historical details of the earliest expansions remain uncertain. During the Republic and Empire, successful rulers could extend the Pomerium to reflect Rome's increasing power and territorial expansion. One of the most famous later expansions occurred under the Emperor Claudius in AD 49. Claudius enlarged the sacred boundary, presenting the act as part of Rome's continuing growth. Later emperors also altered or renewed sections of it, and surviving boundary stones provide valuable archaeological evidence for its location. These stones, known as cippi, could mark the course of the Pomerium through the urban landscape. Inscriptions recorded the authority under which the boundary had been established or extended. They remind us that what might otherwise have appeared to be an invisible religious concept had a very real presence in Roman law and public space. The Pomerium ultimately reveals something fundamental about how Romans understood their city. Rome was not defined only by houses, streets, temples, walls, and monuments. It was also defined by sacred geography. Different forms of authority belonged in different spaces, and crossing a boundary could change the religious and legal rules governing an individual.